Greetings. My name is Eli Anderson, and I am the storytelling expert from the StoryAidEU project. I teach, lecture, write, and deliver a range of storytelling courses and productions. Today, it's my pleasure to guide you through the exciting module number 8 concerning creating supportive networks. This is a critical part of the module format because it talks about, at the end of this module, you will gain some understanding of supportive networks and how to develop those networks, and a really interesting opportunity to look at a tool called the Tree of Life. We will also be looking at a range of supports and what those supports do and how they develop others and care for others. Now, certainly we're talking about supportive networks, and those supportive networks have a range of things that one would consider as critical. And these different networks can be broken down in this way: collaborative relationships, and they will produce a range of better services, a shared knowledge and insight to one's own discipline and one's own practice, but also it will expand the database, those bits of knowledge that you would otherwise not have received. Secondly, we're talking about the healthcare social networks, and those are active platforms, and many of those are around sharing ideas, around debating treatment options, and really looking at a promise to improve the vulnerable people that you have responsibility for. And those colleagues, once they collectively come together to begin to look at and reflect on their practice and what they do, the patient culture, etc., and safety, it is less likely for you to feel isolated and fear for the worst. And those networks can exist in different places. Organizationally, they can be core discussion networks, networks for you to begin to really debate and challenge some of your thinking. Some internal social networks that can be they can imply formal roles within the organization, but also the external social networks. And these are very important. How you maintain your integrity, your health, both within the organization and without. It's important to look at the patient networks and how those networks can really begin to open up dialogues as to how they can speak openly and freely about their situation, about their recovery, and be involved in their recovery. And what that does is prevent the isolation of these people. And the patient networks also, once they're able to tell their story and feel less isolated, there is a reduction in the anxiety level of the patients, their caregivers, their loved ones, because they feel as though they're part of their future. And those social networks can begin to also look at patient support, other behaviors that actually you might want to emulate, things that challenge the status quo, things that you need to find out for to gain your voice in a situation that might feel as though it's not welcomed. The healthcare networks are crucial because they are looking at not only the clinical cases, the medical knowledge, etc., but also your support system, how you gather information and how you find new clinical findings, how you determine how patients can be brought into the conversation, a medical community, if you will. And so therefore you can begin to look at very difficult cases in a much wider way of, as we said before, pulling in those particular capital, that particular skill capital that one needs. And so over the next slide, you talk a little bit about the types of support that one would get, the practical support, the emotional support. It allows you to also re-establish connections with families and those for whom the patient needs their loved ones. Now, how do you develop these things? Well, they can be developed in different ways. Leaders are really critical in developing a organizational culture that allows and that permits mentorship opportunities and opportunities to discuss difficult situations. Also, those networks act and create and maintain opportunities to reflect on safety and the individual, and really look at both the internal structures and the external structures, and look at how these communities interact. The process that forms the networks, or that really based on this idea of dynamic spatial architectures, how these spaces are looked at, who enters those spaces, who doesn't enter those spaces, but also how those spaces reinforce and advocate for the most vulnerable within it. And so you can see that those unique ecosystems, once they are created and advocate for those people with less power, that the stories that emerge can be life-changing. The next two slides really talk about cases, and I would urge you to read them. Now we're really looking at the idea, that tool that I spoke of at the beginning, which is the Tree of Life. Now, it is a methodology created by Nkubi Milo in 2016, and it was based in South Africa. And really what it's talking about is a way of understanding how to put into action narrative coaching or narrative therapy. And what it does do is look at the tree and how, by working your way through that tree in terms of looking at your relationship with your heritage, relationship with yourself, what sorts of things that are really important to you, how do you make that available to others, and what are the gifts that come as a result of that. That approach, that metaphor of a tree in Zimbabwean folklore, has been critical for helping vulnerable children, certainly within East and Southern Africa. And it is brought here to enable us to take time and see and remind ourselves how important and valuable our skills are, how important we are as human beings and carers, and what we have to give and what other things help us to maintain our enthusiasm, our connection, our insight. It's just one of a number of different methodologies, but certainly the Tree of Life is a really important aspect of how we do our work. And really, to conclude, storytelling networks, those are networks from which stories emerge, recognize multiple professionals, multiple non-professional networks, and they allow the storytelling to integrate and form relationships to form a healing community. The second point is that healthcare professionals must begin to really think about how they create those safe environments for professionals to work, and not to re-traumatize vulnerable people or their loved ones, so that the professionals and the patients or the vulnerable people and their loved ones experience a space that allows that patient to feel safe, advocated for, and can discuss and share their story. And the last one is to talk about how we grow ourselves within the supportive network. And it requires some tools. It requires the knowledge that spaces need to be constantly created and made safe, and that also we as human beings have a propensity to create story. So we need to create those spaces where story can be shared and valued. So I really hope that this particular module will feel as exciting as it does for me, but also that that module will allow you to step back and really think about how important those networks are to your health, your physical health, and your emotional health, and your spiritual health. I really hope you enjoy the rest of these modules. Take care.